Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Today's story, episode 267, The Other Side of Time, read by Alan V. Hare, opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, the past, present, and future might exist forever. All that remained of reality was the digital clock on the wall of his lab, which read 1200 hours, the exact time the experiment had been started. Darius tried to collect his thoughts, but found his mind jumbled. Everything he ever experienced poured in at once, competing for his attention. He closed his eyes, opened them again, and tried to focus on the clock's display. It stubbornly clung to the present, seconds frozen at 00, echoes of itself shrinking off into the distance, like he was in a hall of mirrors or looking at a stack of cells from an old animation. Then Darius tried to move and found, to his horror, that he was frozen to the surface of the frame he was in. "This is all in your mind," he tried to remind himself as panic began to set in. "The arrow of time does not exist," Darius proclaimed dramatically, in an attempt to provoke his audience. "It's just an illusion created by our minds to organize our experiences. Everything that ever has and will happen already exists at its own coordinate in space-time. But our brains are not designed to comprehend the simultaneous nature of reality, so in order to function, it creates a linear experience. Hence, we are presented with a one-way flow we call time, and a single frame of reference we call the present, which, by the way, is no more real than the past or the future." His audiences usually reacted to this statement, but this one remained stubbornly silent, hiding behind the glare of the spotlights. "Can you turn down the stage lights, please?" he requested to some unseen technician, shading his eyes with a hand. The light dimmed slightly. "A bit more, please, or turn up the house lights. I'd like to see the, fellow disruptors." That was how he had been asked to refer to the attendees. Darius had been invited to speak at a global executive retreat on innovation through disruption. Otherwise, he would have never been able to even afford a room in the exclusive Swiss mountain village where the event was being held, let alone a ticket to attend. He assumed that other than the conference center employees, he was the only person in the room who didn't have a 7-figure salary. Darius had been invited to the conference because his theories on the perception of time made him, in the view of the conference organizers, a great example of a disruptor. When he initially refused the offer on the grounds that his research had nothing to do with business, the organizers insisted that his ideas were exactly the kind of thinking they wanted their participants exposed to. The fee he had been offered made it impossible to turn their invitation down. So now he was standing in front of a room of billionaires trying to explain what he believed was the true nature of reality. "To understand what I mean when I say time is an illusion created by your mind," he continued, "I want you to imagine the universe as a rectangular block of cheese, where the long edge represents the dimension of time. A single perpendicular slice through the block along the time axis represents the present. For example, if I'm near the top edge of the cheese slice and someone on another planet is near the bottom, which could be thousands of light years away, we'd share the same present, the same frame of reference. So what, you might ask? Someone in the audience coughed and a few others fidgeted. Please bear with me. I'll keep this analogy short, but you need to understand its underlying concepts as they form the basis of my theory. Again, the other person and I are not moving relative to each other, so in any given space-time slice we share a common present because time is moving at the same rate for both of us. I'm not going to dive into relativity theory here, but needless to say, motion affects time. This is a proven fact. So let's say my pal on that distant planet starts walking toward me. We would no longer be moving at the same velocity, and their slice of space-time would bend by a small fraction pointing ahead of me along the time axis. The slice, from their frame of reference, now intersects my future self. If they could somehow instantly jump over to meet me, I would be decades older. Conversely, if they walk away from me, their slice will bend into my past. So my past and future exist in their present depending on their motion relative to me. Ergo, my past, future, and present coexist. Our brains help us sort through this apparent paradox by making it appear that our slice of the present flows forward along the dimension of time. My research is exploring how we can break free from the linear perception of reality our minds impose on us. When Darius finished the explanation of his research and opened the floor for questions, he wasn't surprised there were none. After an awkward silence, the group gave him a polite applause and he left the stage. "Dr. Hussaini!" someone called out. Darius turned to find a dark-haired woman dressed in a gray business suit trying to catch his attention. "I'm Liana Brunner from the Block Foundation in Geneva. We're a privately funded nonprofit which supports innovative research, and we are very interested in your work." Before he could respond, the moment hiccuped, then shattered, and Darius was again staring at his lab's wall clock, which still echoed off into the distance. Frozen in place, the best he could do was wiggle a bit to the right, which shifted his perspective, allowing him to see the seconds display on the partly obscured clock in the layer immediately behind the first. Slightly offset and smaller, the last digit was 1, and the clock behind that displayed a 2 and so forth off into infinity. Darius gasped. Time had fractured into a stack of moments which receded into the future. Instinctively, he knew if he could turn around, he'd see echoes of his lab receding into the past. A rush of excitement washed over him. His experiment had worked. He had broken free of the tyranny of linear time. He just needed to let them know so his disrupted mind could be returned to its normal state. As Darius considered how he could communicate his success, another presence swept him away. He was alone, sitting in a meeting room with windows overlooking a lake. Swiss flags hung on poles along a low stone wall between the street and the water, suggesting the building was in Geneva. A metal logo mounted to the wall opposite the windows consisted of a stylized spiral galaxy with the words Block Foundation underneath. Suddenly, the door opened, and Liana Brunner and an older man wearing casual but expensive clothes entered. They sat down across from Darius. Darius immediately recognized the man as the patriarch of one of Europe's richest families. "Thanks for coming, Dr. Hussaini," Liana said. "I'd like to introduce you to Giovanni Costa, our benefactor." Giovanni nodded in acknowledgement, moving with the fluidity of a younger person. However, the skin on his face had been overaged by too many days spent in the sun on the deck of a luxury yacht. "I have been looking forward to meeting you for quite some time," Costa said, extending a wrinkled hand across the table for Darius to shake. "I've been following your work for the last decade with great interest." Taken a bit off guard by meeting such a rich and powerful figure, Darius shook hands and then looked questioningly at Liana. "Mr. Costa asked me to set this meeting up," she explained. "He's interested in funding your research through the foundation. In particular, your work on the non-linear nature of time," the older man added, and withdrew his hand before leaning back in his chair. "Even with excellent health," he sighed, "I am being swept down the river of time faster than I want. The best I can hope for is to swim against the current which only delays the inevitable. I get regular infusions of blood plasma from young donors. The treatment is experimental and shows promise, but I've never believed in putting all my money on one horse." Darius suspected he knew where this was headed. It wasn't the first time that someone misinterpreted what his ideas implied. He put up a hand to object. "Before you go too far down that road, let me explain. I'm not talking about building a time machine. I don't think that would even be possible. I'm talking about being able to perceive the dimension of time, like the way we perceive physical space." "I understand that, Dr. Hussaini," Costa assured. "All I want to do is take away the financial roadblocks to your work, so you can realize your dream of breaking the iron chains of linear perception. After that," the older man smiled, "maybe what today seems impossible will not be, once we can see the universe in a different way." The meeting broke apart into a miasma of unorganized moments which suddenly overwhelmed Darius's mind before ebbing again, leaving him staring at the wall clock and its time-shifted clones receding into the distance once more. Experimentally, he tried concentrating a few frames ahead, willing himself to shift. Nothing happened. The jumps, he finally conceded, had been random, suddenly spinning him out from the moment the experiment had started, then jerking him back like a yo-yo. Did they have something to do with flux in the fields of his experimental apparatus used to disrupt his mind's ability to build models of the outside world? His thoughts became muddled again, memories, ideas, and logic running over the top of each other, fighting for his attention before suddenly settling down into a single experience. Darius became aware that he was in the lab. The wall clock, minus its infinite recession of clones, claimed it was 2300 hours and 42 minutes. Time had moved forward. With relief, he tried to lift his head, intending to take off the electroencephalogram cap he was wearing. However, his arms refused to cooperate. Panicked, his eyes darted around the room until they discovered Liana and Costa sitting beside the makeshift stack of computer monitors, which showed various outputs from the brainwave modification machines. They were talking, unaware that he was conscious. "It's been 11 hours. Can you tell what is going on yet?" Costa demanded impatiently. Liana typed on a keyboard, consulting one of the monitors. "His frame of reference is tied to the instant we switch the machine on," she explained. "So for him, this moment is still in his future if I'm reading this correctly. I think that's why he is catatonic. His consciousness is in our past." "The experiment worked," Costa gushed enthusiastically. "It's too soon to tell," Liana corrected, still scrutinizing the readouts. "But I think that is a fair assessment. These events, here and here," she circled abrupt dips in a line graph the computers had drawn on one screen. "I think those are indications that his mind jumped into past events. And look at this current spike. It suggests he's jumped forward." Darius watched as the two turned away from the screen to scrutinize him. "He blinked. I think he's jumped to the present," Liana said, surprised. "Dr. Hussaini, are you with us?" Darius tried to reply, only managing to make a guttural croak as he attempted to form a word. For some reason, his body was unwilling to carry out directions from a mind out of sync with it in time. "I think that grunt confirms it," Liana said, satisfied she had been right. "We know when and where the machine was turned on, and we have a measurement from then to now. So we have the basis for a coordinate system," she concluded excitedly, turning to face Costa. "Those dips in the graph must jump back in time. I should be able to figure out when and where. However, we'll need more data to refine the calculations." "Of course," Costa agreed. "Do we know enough to control his next shift?" "I'm not sure. Maybe," Liana hesitated, then added, "I need to look for a correlation between variations in the electric fields we're feeding his brain and the jumps. Wait, I think I have it. Try 5 minutes forward," Costa suggested. Before he could manage to groan again, Darius's consciousness was drowned in a sea of events, then emerged back in the lab. I, he stammered, causing both Liana and Costa to stare at him. "It worked," Liana exclaimed excitedly. "We triggered that jump. Let me try something to confirm." Darius snapped back to his initial frame and then plunged through it into the past. "My goal," he explained to a group of stone-faced academics, "is to disrupt the sensory cortex in the brain to prevent it from delivering experiences in a sequential manner. The process is non-intrusive, meaning no surgery or implants are involved. You can think of it as an advanced electroencephalograph which reads and changes the firing pattern of neuronal trajectories." He had jumped 32 years into the past and was reliving his pitch for a postdoctoral research position. "The theory can only be tested using human subjects," he added quietly, anticipating pushback on that aspect of the project. "How will you know if you have been successful?" one particularly skeptical committee member asked. "Post-experiment interviews," he explained. "So the results will be subjective and open to influence by the interviewer," the department head dismissed. "The interviewer and subjects will not know what the expected results are," he said defensively, beginning to feel desperate. Do you know if scrambling the brain's perceptual processing will have any long-term effects? Another assessor asked. Darius didn't know the answer and had hoped to avoid that line of questioning. It sounds more like psychological research, not physics, yet another added. All the committee members nodded in agreement, and Darius knew his proposal was dead. They eventually offered him a different research project in quantum gravity, which, because he needed the money, he accepted, quietly continuing to develop his theories and draw up plans for an experimental apparatus to prove them. A second later, he was back in the lab. The wall clock read 1158 minutes, and Liana was activating the machine for the first time. "I've initiated the system," she confirmed, and Darius began to count backwards. 5, 4, 3, 3. He paused. The numbers suddenly didn't make sense. They piled up in a jumble, and he didn't have a clue which one was next. Darius, are you still with us?" Liana asked in alarm. Darius attempted to answer, but like the numbers, all the words tumbled in at once, trying to exit his mouth at the same time. "I'm switching it off," Liana announced, and the linear world suddenly snapped back in place. It was working," Darius choked out. "It's hard to explain. Everything started coming at once. Words, sounds, images, making it hard to think. I just need more time to adapt. We have to continue, start it up again," he insisted. "Are you sure?" Liana questioned, glancing at Costa, who nodded. She typed in the initiation code as the clock struck noon, and the present imploded in an infinity of nows. Instantly overwhelmed, Darius tried concentrating on the digital clock bolted to the lab's wall. He focused on the clock's display, using it as an anchor for his mind to organize the chaos into a stack of receding frames, like an old flipbook animation. Darius was disappointed with his new mental construct of time. It was, in his opinion, not that much better than a one-way flow. He reluctantly accepted it for now, reminding himself he could get more creative later. Experimentally, he tried to move in space and discovered to his horror he was trapped like a fly in amber. "Turn it off!" he attempted to scream, but no words came out of his mouth. "Turn it off!" Darius tried again as he watched Liana adjust something, and his frame lurched away to another point in the past. "I'm actually the Foundation's chief scientist, so I'll be working closely with you," Liana Brunner explained. Darius was seated in a well-appointed office facing the woman across a desk that looked like it had just been torn out of a page from Architectural Digest. "Now that you've signed the NDA, I can tell you that Mr. Costa created and funds the Block Foundation for only one purpose: to find a cure for aging." "Don't take this wrong," Darius said. "I mean, I'm ecstatic about your generous support of my research, but I've told you before it has nothing to do with time travel." "True," Liana admitted. "But hear me out. We are close to a major breakthrough. In another decade or so, we'll be able to stop the aging process. Unfortunately, Mr. Costa was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He won't live long enough to receive the treatment. That's where your work comes in. If we can send our research back in time 3 decades. "But that's not possible," Darius objected. "Only for the moment, Dr. Hussaini." Liana smiled knowingly, pulled out a file, and pushed it across the desk to Darius. He flipped through a few pages, stopping on one in particular. "Is this real? Who did the research? Why haven't I heard of this before?" he complained incredulously. "We always suspected we might need a backup plan," Liana replied, deflecting the question. "The Foundation has funded the research for the last several decades, and as you can see, the results are game-changing. Our backup plan has been significantly more successful than our advancements in anti-senescence." "This is Nobel-level work," Darius pointed out, getting excited. "How have you managed to keep something this big quiet?" "Let me tell you, it hasn't been easy, Dr. Hussaini. We had to commit to supporting the scientists involved for life, agreeing to allow them to publish at a time of Mr. Costa's choosing. Of course, he'll push that date off as long as he can. As you can see, tachyons are real. We've been studying them for decades. 25 years ago, we were able to build a detector. It wasn't until last year that we managed to create a generator." Darius was stunned. You want to use faster-than-light tachyons, which travel backwards in time to send your research to the detector you built 2.5 decades ago, he guessed. But if you have a way to create them, why haven't you done it already? Because we haven't figured out how to target specific points in space-time, Liana admitted, easing back in her chair. We'll use the data you generate to build a targeting system for our transmitter. And create a different present, Darius noted doubtfully. I respectfully submit that can't be done. The present is fixed as much as the past and future, and I'm more than willing to accept your money to prove that. You won't be able to send your data back in time. If you could, your anti-senescence treatment would already be available to help Mr. Costa. That's just how causality works. From your point of view, that makes sense, Liana agreed. However, we believe nothing is immutable. There are an infinite number of possible presents, pasts, and futures. If you are able to target a specific coordinate in the past and alter it with information, then you can make any present or future you want. That's what we intend to do. Good luck with that, Darius began to laugh. The scene splintered like a pane of glass, and he fell through the fracture in space-time to his lab. Its wall clock displayed 2,300 hours, 11 hours into his future. We've got all the data we need, Liana said excitedly, consulting a screen Darius couldn't see. He was lying on a recliner at the back of the lab, the thick wire snake running from his electroencephalogram cap to the equipment rack restricted his head movement. Instead of struggling, he watched out of the corner of one eye. Costa walked into his field of view and stood behind Liana, observing her work. Are you downloading the data? He demanded. Yes, it'll only take a few more minutes, Gina replied distractedly. Costa suddenly looked over at him. Where is his consciousness? As far as I can tell, Gina said, stopping her work to check another screen. He's bouncing between his initial frame of reference and some other random ones. Right now, I think he might be sharing our slice of space-time. Darius froze, defocusing his eyes, pretending he wasn't there. What do we do about him? Costa asked. I don't think he's like the others. Money won't keep him quiet. He's got too much to prove. He'll want to write a paper and publish. He signed the NDA, Liana pointed out, swinging around to face Costa. We sue him if he breaks it. That's not good enough, Costa insisted. It's like closing the gate after the horse is bolted. I don't want anyone else getting access to the past. What would happen if we disconnect the machine before his normal brain activity is restored? Liana looked shocked. It would probably stay disrupted. He'd be in a catatonic state for the rest of his life. And he wouldn't be able to communicate what he knows, Costa mused. He was the first to try this, so of course, we didn't know it would cause permanent brain damage. Plus, he insisted you turn on the system for the second time. We have that recorded, so it's not our fault. I appreciate his contribution to the project, so I'll generously ensure he's well looked after. The Foundation will pay for his care. Before Liana could stop him, Costa, moving faster than a man his age should have been able to, raced over to the equipment rack, grabbed the wire snake which was connected to Darius's cranial cap, and started to pull it out. Stunned, all Darius could do was focus on the lab's wall clock. He compelled the universe to stop its relentless march into the future, and suddenly he was back at his initial frame of reference, and the clock read 12:00. He stared at the thing, unwilling to let it move forward again. He had seen the future and knew it couldn't be changed, and was determined not to go there. The wall clock began to flash like it had been reset. He sensed the pull of the future trying to drag time forward. No, he shouted at the universe. It's just an illusion. You can help us continue creating original content twice a month by either heading over to ko-fi.com/makeshiftstories and making a one-time donation, or becoming an ongoing supporter at patreon.com patreon.com/makeshift stories. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written and read by Alan V. Hare. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Makeshift Studios. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.